Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we share stories that inspire and challenge the heart. Today's story is about a family facing an unexpected betrayal from someone they trusted the most. It all begins with a loving grandmother who mysteriously keeps falling out of her wheelchair and a son determined to find out why. What he discovers will break your heart and reveal a deeper truth about abuse in unexpected places. Stay with us as we dive into a story of resilience, family, and the fight for justice. If you enjoy stories filled with unexpected twists and moments that leave you speechless, don't forget to like and subscribe to Hopeful Horizon. Let us know where you're listening from and stay tuned for more powerful narratives. Evelyn Winters had always been the heart of her family. At 78 years old, she was the type of grandmother everyone could count on, even from her wheelchair. Despite her age and reduced mobility, her sharp wit and warm heart never faltered. Her son, Terrence, visited her regularly, making sure she had everything she needed. Lately, however, Evelyn had been having a string of accidents. Several times a week, she would mysteriously fall out of her wheelchair, resulting in bruises and even a few close calls. Terrence couldn't understand how it kept happening. His mother was careful, and even though her arthritis was severe, she was still capable of handling herself with her wheelchair. "It's just so strange, Mom," Terrence said one afternoon while sitting with her in her small living room. The TV played softly in the background, and the room smelled of fresh-baked cookies, just like it always did. "This is the third time this month. Are you sure you're not trying to reach for something out of place, or—" Evelyn gave him a patient, slightly tired smile. "Terrence, dear, I don't know what to tell you. I don't try to do anything reckless. It just happens." He studied her face, the soft lines of age etched into her skin, the wisdom in her eyes. Something was wrong. He could feel it, but he didn't want to push her too hard. She'd already been through enough with her declining health. Her nurse, Margaret, a well-recommended home care professional, was assigned to her about 6 months ago. While Margaret was polite, something about her always seemed off to Terrence. She wasn't as warm as the other nurses had been, and sometimes her tone when addressing Evelyn felt detached. "Is Margaret helping you when she's here?" Terrence asked, his brow furrowing. "She does her job," Evelyn replied vaguely, her eyes averting slightly. "But I wouldn't say she's the most caring of nurses." That was it. His mother's subtle discomfort confirmed Terrence's growing suspicions. He decided he needed to dig deeper. After all, something wasn't right. If Margaret was mistreating Evelyn in any way, he had to know. He couldn't stand the idea of his mother suffering in silence. "I'm going to stay the night tomorrow," Terrence announced, causing Evelyn to look up in mild surprise. "Just to keep an eye on things, make sure everything's in order." Evelyn sighed but nodded. "If that'll help put your mind at ease, dear." Terrence leaned over, gently squeezing her hand. "It will, Mom. I just want to make sure you're safe." That night, as Terrence sat at home, he contemplated his next move. Installing a hidden camera seemed drastic, but his gut told him it was the right choice. There were too many unanswered questions, too many strange incidents. He needed to know what was really going on when he wasn't there, and so, with a heavy heart, he made the decision that would change everything. The next day, Terrence returned to his mother's house under the guise of staying over, but in truth, he had a different plan. He discreetly installed several hidden cameras around her house, including the living room where she spent most of her time and near her bedroom, all positioned to keep an eye on Margaret's interactions with Evelyn. Evelyn didn't seem to notice, nor did she question his extra attentiveness. She trusted him completely, and that weighed on Terrence's heart. He didn't want to betray that trust, but if it meant protecting her, he had no choice. For the next few days, Terrence monitored the footage whenever he wasn't at work, praying that his suspicions were unfounded. He hoped he'd find nothing more than a simple case of accidents. But after 3 days, what he saw made his blood run cold. Margaret had just arrived for her usual afternoon shift. At first, everything seemed normal. She helped Evelyn out of bed, prepared her medication, and made small talk. But the tone of her voice was different from what Terrence had observed in person. There was a coldness to it, a hidden resentment that was hard to ignore. Then came the moment that shattered any illusion of professionalism. Evelyn asked Margaret for help adjusting her wheelchair, and instead of assisting her gently, Margaret roughly yanked the chair, causing Evelyn to wobble dangerously. Evelyn winced but didn't say a word, as though used to such treatment. Terrence's heart clenched. And then it happened. Margaret purposefully knocked a small item off the table, a subtle move, but telling. When Evelyn bent slightly to pick it up, Margaret tipped the wheelchair just enough to send her tumbling to the floor. Evelyn cried out, struggling to brace herself as she hit the ground. Terrence watched in horror as Margaret stood there, cold and indifferent, before saying, "You need to be more careful, Evelyn. That could have been a lot worse." No apology, no effort to help her up. Nothing. Terrence felt a wave of anger so strong that it left him shaking. How long had this been going on? How many other accidents had been intentional? Terrence immediately downloaded the footage. There was no way he was going to let this continue. Margaret had shown her true colors, and now it was time to confront the ugly truth. His mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. He couldn't let this go. His mother had been suffering in silence, and he would make sure justice was served. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. Margaret would be back tomorrow. He would confront her then, but not before showing his mother what he'd uncovered. The thought of Evelyn's reaction made his stomach churn, but she needed to know, and together they would put an end to this nightmare. The following morning, Terrence arrived at his mother's house earlier than usual. His heart was heavy, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the tablet with the footage of Margaret's cruel treatment. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but it had to happen. Evelyn deserved the truth, even if it was painful. As he walked into the living room, Evelyn was already in her wheelchair, peacefully reading a book with her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up and smiled warmly at her son, unaware of the storm about to unfold. "Morning, dear. You're here early," she said, her voice as gentle as ever. Terrence tried to smile back, but the weight of the situation made it impossible. "Mom, there's something I need to talk to you about, something serious." Evelyn's smile faded as she noticed his tense expression. She set her book down and looked at him, concern filling her eyes. "What is it, Terrence? Is everything all right?" He sat down across from her, taking a deep breath before handing her the tablet. "I need you to watch this. It's about Margaret." Confusion flickered across Evelyn's face as she took the tablet, but as the video played, her expression shifted to one of shock and disbelief. She watched the footage of Margaret tipping her wheelchair, causing her to fall. Evelyn's hands shook as she covered her mouth, her eyes wide with realization. I didn't think," Evelyn stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I had to know what was going on," Terrence said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I had to make sure you were safe." Evelyn nodded, wiping away a tear. "I didn't want to believe it, but now I see. I thought it was just my old age, that maybe I was getting clumsy. But Margaret..." Her voice trailed off, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The betrayal hung in the air like a thick fog, wrapping around them both. Evelyn had always been a strong woman, but this revelation had shaken her to the core. "I'm going to confront her today," Terrence said firmly. "She's coming for her shift in a couple of hours, and I'm going to be here when she arrives. She's not going to get away with this." Evelyn nodded again, her expression hardening with resolve. She needs to answer for what she's done. The two of them sat in silence for a few minutes, gathering their strength for the confrontation ahead. Terrence's heart ached for his mother, but he was determined to protect her no matter what it took. Margaret arrived at her usual time, a forced smile plastered on her face as she walked through the door. She didn't expect Terrence to be there, and when she saw him sitting with Evelyn, her smile faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Good afternoon, Evelyn." "Terrence," Margaret greeted them, her tone as falsely cheerful as ever. Terrence stood up, his arms crossed, eyes hard. "Margaret, we need to talk." Margaret blinked, caught off guard by his serious tone. "Is something wrong?" "You could say that," Terrence replied coldly. "I've been watching the footage from the cameras I installed in my mother's house." Margaret's face went pale. "Cameras? What cameras?" Evelyn, who had remained silent until now, spoke up, her voice calm but steely. "The ones that caught you tipping my wheelchair, making me fall on purpose." Margaret's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. But then she quickly masked her expression, putting on a facade of innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about. I would never do such a thing." Terrence held up his phone, playing the video of Margaret's actions. The sound of Evelyn's cry as she fell echoed through the room, and Margaret's face twisted in horror as she realized she had been caught. I didn't mean to," Margaret stammered, her voice faltering. "Save it," Terrence snapped, his anger barely contained. "You've been abusing my mother, and I won't let it continue. You're fired, and I'll be reporting this to the authorities." Margaret's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. "Please, I need this job. I didn't mean to hurt her." Evelyn stared at her, disappointment and hurt etched across her face. "You could have come to me if you were overwhelmed. You could have asked for help. But instead, you chose to hurt me. I trusted you, Margaret." Tears filled Margaret's eyes, but neither Terrence nor Evelyn were moved by her display. The damage had been done, and there was no undoing it. "I'll leave," Margaret said quietly, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry." Without another word, Margaret turned and walked out of the house, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As the door closed behind her, Terrence let out a long breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The nightmare was finally over. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and paperwork. Terrence immediately reported Margaret's actions to the authorities, and within days, she was arrested for elder abuse and charged with assault. Terrence and Evelyn were relieved to see justice being served, but the emotional toll of the ordeal still weighed heavily on them. Evelyn, though shaken, found comfort in her family's support. Her other children and grandchildren visited more frequently, ensuring she was never alone. They couldn't undo the harm Margaret had caused, but they could make sure Evelyn felt loved and cared for in the aftermath. Terrence, too, struggled to move past the events, haunted by the thought that he hadn't noticed the abuse sooner. But he reminded himself that he had acted as soon as he knew the truth, and that was what mattered. His mother was safe now, and that was all that mattered. Weeks passed, and gradually, life began to return to normal for Evelyn and Terrence. They found a new nurse, a kind woman named Angela, who treated Evelyn with the care and respect she deserved. Under Angela's gentle watch, Evelyn's health improved, and the mysterious falls stopped entirely. Evelyn's strength returned, both physically and emotionally. Though the betrayal had wounded her deeply, she refused to let it define her. She was still the strong, loving grandmother her family had always known, and she would continue to be their rock no matter what. As for Terrence, he learned to forgive himself for not noticing the signs earlier. He had done what any good son would do. He had protected his mother and sought justice on her behalf. In the end, that was enough. The experience had brought them closer as a family, reminding them of the importance of vigilance and love. They knew they couldn't take anything for granted, and they would always look out for one another, no matter what challenges life threw their way. The Winters family had faced a dark chapter, but they emerged stronger, united in their love and commitment to each other. And as they moved forward, they knew they could face anything, together. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of resilience and justice. Evelyn's story reminds us of the importance of family, vigilance, and standing up against mistreatment, even when it comes from those we trust. If you found this story inspiring or thought-provoking, be sure to leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to Hopeful Horizon and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Let us know where you're tuning in from, and as always, stay hopeful.